Andreanna, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here, Mike.
So for those who don't know her, Andreanna Marshall, or Dre Marshall, has worked in the tech industry for almost 10 years. After starting her career in 2013 as an executive assistant to the CTO of an education software company, she became a Scrum Master, which opened up the doors of professional life. She became eventually a program manager at Nike, and now she's a senior program manager at Amazon. And then in 22, she became a professional Scrum Master at scrum.org and offers training through her business Project Academy. Dre runs a YouTube channel with the same name, alongside co-hosting a brand new YouTube podcast. It's called Not Scrum Dumb, with another Scrum trainer, Scott Adams. And they're short and entertaining as well as highly informative. So do take a look at those. And all of that is really why I wanted to speak with you, Dre, today about building a career in IT project management. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Now, let's get to grips with this career thing, because I do get a lot of people asking me how to get a first project management job. And for me, that was a long, long time ago. So how did you start out in project management? And from your experience, what advice would you give to people who are looking to build a career in IT project management?
Yeah. So I started off, like you said, as an executive assistant to the chief technology officer. She was over the education software company. And the good thing about when I was hired, she wasn't really looking for someone to get her coffee. She was looking for someone to help her with her projects. But at the end of the day, we also didn't have anyone to help manage the projects for the software team. So in a few months, I was able to transition and go directly work with the engineers.
Brilliant.
So that is initially how I got my start. I think if I were to tell anyone starting out today, is look for the opportunities to actually prove yourself in that particular area that you're trying to transition to. So I was an executive assistant. I was supposed to manage projects. That's what you have to prove yourself in.
Yeah.
That's what I did. I transitioned. And then our director actually was like, hey, we ended up getting a new director. And he was like, I want to do this thing called Scrum. Literally no one knew what Scrum was. So we all ended up getting a Scrum trainer to actually train us.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people, I see a lot of YouTube videos that are like, training isn't that good and certifications aren't that good, but how do you know what you're doing without that?
Yeah.
It's like the first step of the marathon. No one's like, that first step was useless. It's absolutely necessary. Getting started, the first thing is actually training. And that's not just to sell you on training. It's like, how do you know what you're doing without that?
Yeah.
So and there's tons of free content on these trainings as well. So one, get the training on the thing that you want to do, whether that's traditional project management, whether that's Scrum, or if you're trying to do a hybrid approach, then you need to understand both. The next step is, again, proving that you can actually do this. So I was still working as like the project coordinator for the data analyst team, but they ended up getting someone to be both the product owner and the Scrum Master. And he had more experience than me. He had done this before, so made sense to them. I don't know if it really makes sense to have a product owner be the Scrum Master, but that's a whole different video. That's a whole different video that we could probably go on a whole tangent about how the anti-patterns of that, and it didn't work out.
Yeah.
So, but even before it didn't work out with him, I took that opportunity. I was like, okay, I understand Scrum. I work with a data analyst team that isn't using Scrum. So I was like, hey, I'd like to be their Scrum Master, at least to get that experience. So, and to add to that would be, if you want to transition to a project manager or a Scrum Master, being courageous is really important. You have to be willing to ask in order to get this experience. And if you're afraid to, maybe either of these roles may not be best for you anyway, because they require a lot of communication, a lot of interfacing with people. And there are times where you have to really stand up for yourself and your team. So I was really courageous in the aspect of like, all right, I'm going to take this leap. I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to transition this team and work with them. And then when it didn't work out with the guy who was doing both two roles, right? Product owner and Scrum Master, I was like, hi, like, I'd like to step up and do this. And they were like, okay, that sounds good. And so he was able to focus on being a product owner, and that worked out a lot better for him. And then I was able to transition into a Scrum Master. So that's how I started off my career. I gave some tips within that, but I would say getting some training, being courageous, looking at where you're at right now, and seeing how you can get experience where you're at. If you can't, look at areas where you can volunteer. There are plenty of nonprofits that are willing to get support and help. There are plenty of companies hiring contract. People don't want to work contract jobs. At least I don't know if that's a thing in the UK, but here in the US, people are like, I'm so nervous about it.
It's quite popular in the UK because it pays well, and there's a shortage of project managers. So here, it's a lifestyle choice, and it has a different risk profile. It pays more because if you're out of work, you're out of work. If you're on holiday, you're on holiday. You know, there's no pay. But yeah, it's quite popular here in the UK too.
Yeah, I've told people, try contract. It's a good way to get in. Yes, you have to prove yourself. If you believe in yourself and you work hard and you embrace empiricism, especially if you're a Scrum Master, you're going to get the role.
Yeah.
And not everyone quite understands that. I got my job at Nike through a contract position, and everyone I know, they started off contract. It's rare to find someone that actually works in tech for Nike that didn't start off as contract. And that was like eye-opening and shocking, but that's something that most people experience.
But actually, from Nike's point of view, it's probably quite a smart way to recruit, because you can try before you buy. Quite literally, find out how good this contractor is. And if they're good enough, bring them on staff to save money. And if they're not, replace them by a new contractor that is going to hopefully do better.
And the other thing is, you're competing with thousands of people applying to Nike. Not many people are actually doing the contract work. Yeah. It's shocking, but that's how you're going to get in. That's how you're going to be first.
Yeah.
When they're looking for a job, because you're already there. You already live in the city. You already understand the players, the people, and you have the connections, and you've proven yourself. In that org.
Yeah. The tips you've given are very much what I would have thought, really, because it seems to me it's about bootstrapping, a combination of learning, formal or otherwise. Because one of the great things about Scrum is you can pick up the Scrum Guide for free, download the Scrum Guide for free, and you can understand it. It's nice and easy. You can get some formal training in many different formats to help you to understand what this really means in practice. But it's also taking the opportunities that are there, keeping your eyes open, grabbing the opportunities, and that courage. And it doesn't really matter what order, as long as you are constantly looking for every opportunity to learn and to prove yourself and to take the opportunities. You managed to get to Nike, which is a big name. But then if anyone were going to name the top half dozen names in the tech industry, Amazon would be on that list. So how did you then take that experience and trade that up to the job you're in now at a much more senior level?
Yeah, I think, the positive thing is Nike's still a big name.
Yeah, so it's a big name, but it's not. But nobody thinks nobody thinks technology. They think running shoes.
But I was kind of fortunate at the time. Nike was working on some big tech programs like buy online, pick up in store, that required a lot of just the ability to work at brick and mortar and technology put together. Yeah. So it's a longer life cycle. It's a little bit different. So I was able to work on these massive programs that gave me the experience that they were looking for.
Yeah.
So I actually applied, I believe, on LinkedIn. I was kind of shocked that I got a job at Amazon applying directly on LinkedIn. Yeah. So I worked at one of the subsidiaries for LinkedIn. So that would be Ring Devices. Okay. And yeah, that same kind of experience really helped. Is like, okay, you're used to working with backend, you're used to working with retail and apps. So with that, I just had really the right experience. And I personally set up my resume in a way that really has like what achievements I had, not just like what I did, but here are the achievements. So that's a way that my style has changed for my resume. Hopefully everyone listening, if you haven't done that, you'll do that. But that seems to be more effective, is really hitting on those wins. So yes, it's a big name that isn't quite big in the tech space, but those big programs that I was able to work on really boosted my resume and helped me get that job.
Yeah. And that resume thing is very important too, isn't it? And it's not just a matter of framing your resume to look like what you've achieved rather than what you just happen to do. But also it's about saying, well, who am I going to apply to and how can I tailor the resume that I'm sending to them so that it looks like the good fit. So that's brilliant.
Yeah.
And along the way, I believe you've worked in predictive and hybrid as well as pure play Scrum projects. And this is another question that comes up so often. I'm sure you get it a lot. But with that real kind of experience of those, how do you compare those different processes? And again, what are your thoughts for people who are thinking about different ways to approach their career?
So when I think of predictive, I think of it's linear, it's sequential. It's like a cooking recipe or baking, right? You have to, especially baking, you have to do these certain steps in order. You can't bake first, right?
Yeah.
So you're doing these things in order. It's, literally like waterfall, like water rolling down the stairs. It's raining in LA here, surprisingly, but that's actually happening. So that's what I think when I think of predictive. Like we have sign off, we're supposed to produce X thing, and it's usually a large batch of work.
Yeah.
Scrum, on the other hand, we're producing smaller batches of work. We're using self-managing teams, empiricism, basically transparency, inspection, adaptation. We're learning as we go. We're faster to changing requirements. So if you're like, hey, I don't want these 5 things, you don't have to have those 5 things because we haven't started those 5 things. We can swap those out. And I think the hybrid environment is where I sort of live right now. So it's where we're using both elements. So the part that I found really effective is still using the Scrum elements to produce small batches.
Yeah.
That's the part where I feel like you can't let that go. If you're going to let something go, don't let that go. But I think really the hybrid area, at least where I'm at now, the predictive area is kind of like a level above the actual Scrum team. So I'm looking at their past work. I'm like, okay, you guys are, as a team, your velocity is this, which is really nice that we have what the team is actually capable of. And I'm forecasting out what this program may look like in 6 months or a year's time.
Yeah. And I can imagine a predictive project manager sitting at that level above you. Love that. You can actually give them a forecast they can feel confident of, because that, I think, as a kind of long-term predictive project manager, that's what your concern is always about, is predictability and control. And of course, that's really Scrum and methodologies and frameworks like it were designed for environments where predictability and control just isn't appropriate.
Yeah. And I think the other aspect is, if they're still, the Scrum team is still using Scrum, at least every month I get to see real progress.
Yeah.
And if something needs to change, we're all in the sprint review, we're having these conversations and the work hasn't been started, and we can easily change those things. So that it actually makes it a lot easier to predict the future and forecast than just using, predictive alone.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And for me, really, when you look at the kind of organizations you've worked in, the kind of organizations I worked with, big organizations, they're making big, complex changes. It's absurd to think that there aren't going to be different elements to a project that are going to need different approaches to deliver them, which is why I think all project management is hybrid. It's just that some project management is very far to one side and some is very far to the other side. And if as a project manager, you don't have at least a familiarity with predictive and a familiarity with a range of agile approaches, then you're not going to be able to tailor your project to your organization's or your client's needs, and you're not going to be a great project manager.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're at a place where you can't hide behind one anymore.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've certainly worked with people that are working hard to learn, especially people that have been 20 years in using waterfall.
Yeah.
So now they're trying to understand the agile space. They're trying to understand Scrum. They're trying to understand Kanban and XP and those other things. But it's worth it. It's necessary. Like you said, it's really hard in IT to find a team that isn't using Scrum.
Yeah, it is challenging. So for a project manager who hasn't really yet put their toe into the Scrum, the Agile waters, it is your day job. So what does the Scrum framework offer to a project manager who hasn't yet really engaged with it?
So in general, I think it offers way more transparency. Starting with the fact that we're working in small batches, you have something that's deliverable at the end of every single sprint. And even before that, during sprint planning, you understand what is their sprint goal. So you have an idea of what they're going to produce at the end of the sprint.
Yeah.
The second part is, like I said, I do believe it actually makes it easier to forecast.
Yeah.
So as a project manager, it makes it so much easier. As someone who's operating with multiple projects and that makes a large program, that predictability and that understanding of each of the teams is really helpful. The ability to inspect, like I said, at the end of every sprint, I'm able to see what's visually done, and we're quickly able to say, okay, this isn't working, or this is working, or our product owner may say, here are some things that we're going to change. And we get a little bit of a look into the product backlog. So we're able to see, like, okay, based on our progress now, we're either ahead or behind, or, we're right on track. So we're able to quickly see these changing things. So I think that's what really helps a project manager, because as a project manager, your job is to deliver these projects on time, within budget, and manage risk. And I think that those elements really help.
Yeah. Where would you start? If you were said to me, Mike, you don't know anything about Scrum, you don't know about anything about Agile, what would be your recommended first step, or a good first? Because there are lots of different ways one could do it, but what would be a good first step for someone wanting to take that advice and move in that direction?
Yeah, well, the first step you've already mentioned is you can actually read the Scrum Guide.
Yeah,
so it's free, scrumguides.org.
Yeah,
that's
we'll
the first
step. We'll put a link
step.
in the description, yeah.
Yeah, I think it really depends on your environment, because I've worked in environments where you have senior program managers and you also have Scrum Masters. If you work with a Scrum Master, go have a conversation with them, shadow them, follow them.
Yeah.
You can actually get that real practical experience and that feel of how does the Scrum team work without ever having to go to YouTube or to pay for a course, because now you can actually live it out. So if you're in that type of environment, that's your absolute first step. It's awesome, right? The second is, like, if you're really not in the environment and you have to be that person that kicks down the door, you have to get some type of training. Wherever that may be, you have to get some kind of training. And then to get a connection with people. So whether that's like meetup groups or any other type of groups, get plugged in with people. I wish that I got plugged in earlier with people. Yeah. My first job, like education software, I did in between Nike, I did go to a company that we worked with different companies to produce their apps. So variety of different apps. And they had other Scrum Masters, and it really helped me grow my career. Yeah. That's what I think that's what really helped me land the job at Nike, get better experience and understanding. And I worked with a lot of different clients, so that also helped. But if you don't have that place, you have to go out and seek it. Yeah. This is going to give you a lot of different exposure. Yeah.
I think talking to people is important. For me, the real light bulb moment wasn't talking to Scrum Masters and project managers who embrace Scrum. It's actually talking to developers about why Scrum makes sense to them. Because if you're a project manager, you're just trying to get the job done, and it's very easy to see the development team as just a resource that should be doing the job. But when you start listening to why Scrum or other agile processes like XP or whatever make sense for them to do their job, you start to realize why Scrum and other agile methods were developed in the way that they were developed. Rather than seeing them as a different way to do project management, they are a response to the needs of a team, which is why, people who come from a very different project tradition, whether it's civil engineering or corporate change projects, struggle to see the need for Scrum because it doesn't make sense. Because actually, it wasn't designed to solve their problems. It was designed to solve very specific developer project problems that developers will explain very carefully if you take time to listen to them.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So what about new project managers? Someone who is coming into the project management profession, they want to build their career. What's your advice for them to really embrace project management? And it may be their whole career, it may be the start of their career, but how do you advise them?
So we talked about getting plugged in, understanding everything, embracing empiricism. Mm-hmm. I mean, you mentioned talking to the developers and things like that, getting their feedback. I think the hardest part from working in IT, especially with Scrum, is letting go.
So before you move on, but for people who aren't familiar with the term empiricism, or for people who think they're familiar with it but haven't used it in the context of Scrum, can you explain what Scrum Masters, Scrum practitioners mean when they use that term?
Yeah, the simplest way I can describe it is you learn by doing. Mm-hmm. And the three pillars of empiricism are transparency. The work is not only visible, but it's well understood. Mm-hmm. We inspect frequently. So we're looking at what did we actually produce? We're inspecting that. And then based on inspection, we're adapting. So we're willing to change. We're willing to learn from our experiences and what we've done. We're willing to get feedback from users or customers that say, I don't like this, or I do like this, or, different things. And we're willing to make those changes for them.
Right. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. That's actually a really good point, because empiricism is not a very common term. I don't hear people running around saying empiricism all day long. So
just the philosophers.
Yes. But it's super important to have that mindset, because every aspect of Scrum embraces either transparency, inspection, or adaptation. So I think, but that's the biggest part of, I think, from traditional project management, where we're solving those problems, or we are the ones solving those problems, to actually helping the team or facilitating a decision instead of being the one that's like, no, you guys should do this, but actually helping them embrace empiricism, even if they make mistakes, really taking that as a learning opportunity and growing and getting better. And I think when I was starting out, I made a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
Some of them, I knew immediately after. Some of them, it took me weeks to figure out that it was actually a terrible idea. But, taking that mindset of it's a learning opportunity, admitting when you've been wrong, growing from that experience. Really, I think the difference between a lot of project managers and Scrum Masters is Scrum Master, you're a little bit more focused on the actual health of the team. You are really about the agile practices, training the organization, training the Scrum team to actually finish within the sprint, while from being a project manager or a program manager, I'm really focused on okay, what are our goals for this program? What's our risk? What's our budget? What's our scope? And making sure that we complete that project on time. So it really depends on what lane you're going into. But I think either one, you have to be willing to embrace empiricism. You have to be willing to continuously grow. You have to get plugged into a group. You have to admit when you're wrong or when you're being maybe a little annoying to the team and you need to back off, and just, allow them to solve their own problems and make sure that you're fitting into those right spaces and facilitating a good end decision.
And I think I'm taking you away from the question I asked, but it's empiricism I think is very, very important, because from my point of view, as someone who's never run a Scrum project and probably never will, the focus on empiricism is something that all project managers can learn from, whether you're doing agile projects or whether you're doing something that is pretty much pure play predictive. Because, two things, I think. One is you mentioned, velocity and the ability to predict, which obviously as a predictive project manager, I love. But of course, that's an empirical measure. It's not based on what the team should be able to achieve. Velocity is a measure of what the team is achieving. It's a misuse or an abuse of velocity to use it as a target setting thing. It's actually, as I understand it, it's about saying, look, we can have a fair degree of confidence about how long something is going to take. It's not our target to hit that time, but that's the best prediction we can make. And it's based on what we've been achieving in the past. And I think the other thing that I really like for years as a predictive project manager. I was trying to build more and more frequent lessons learned reviews in. And along comes Scrum with its sprint retrospectives actually wired into the methodology. And I think what, for me, the big contribution is so many creative ways of running retrospectives available on the web and among the community, which nobody had thought of when I was running lessons learned. So I'm grateful to Scrum for that, if for nothing else.
Yeah, there are a lot of fun retrospectives. And I will say, as a previous Scrum Master, that is where I had the most fun. Yeah. That was like my favorite. Every Scrum Master I know is like, can't wait for this. I'm preparing for, a sprint retrospective. And there are so many ideas out there, and it's a ton of fun. And I think you're correct on how we handle empiricism. And then whether you're predictive or hybrid or Scrum, empiricism is really important to actually achieving whatever goal you have.
Yeah. So let's get back to the advice for I was going to say young people moving into the PM profession, but you can move in at any stage in your career. I was speaking to someone who had finished at the age of 50 a career and wanted to move into project management, and his background suggested to me that if he fancied it, he would be very good at it. So moving into the career, what advice?
Well, I think you kind of already mentioned it's like, what does your past say? And tailor your resume to that. So I always tell people that come and they're like, okay, I want to transition. I'm like, what does your LinkedIn look like? What does your resume look like? Yeah. Have you looked at job descriptions out there?
Yeah.
Do you understand the Scrum Guide? If you understand the Scrum Guide, some of the job descriptions are not correct. So just keep on moving from those companies. But look at the job description, tailor your resume to that.
Yeah.
And that will actually make it a lot easier to transition.
Yeah.
So if you come from, even though I went from, still kind of, you can say in the project management realm, a senior program manager to from a Scrum Master, there were still things that I had gaps in to be a program manager.
Yes.
I looked at what's the job description? What are those things that I have gaps in? And I worked on those things. And then I added those things to my resume.
Yeah.
So that's how you transition, and that's how you do it effectively. A lot of people, they don't think they have that experience. They're like, oh, I only did this coaching thing. I'm like, a Scrum Master's job is to coach.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I did this training thing. Yes, put that on your resume. Like, as a Scrum Master, you are supposed to train the organization, train and help support the product owner, train the developers in agile and Scrum practices. So people tend to overlook their actual accomplishments and what they're good at. And I find that so many times, because I do give like one-on-ones with every class that I take. So I'll go through them and I'm like, you have this, you have that. And they're just, they've totally overlooked their own achievements.
Yeah. And because of that, no experience goes to waste. Just hoover up experiences, put your hand up for things. There'll come a time in your career where you want to start putting your hand down, and you can afford to. But early on in your career, that's the time to get lots of experience, because you never know when that one opportunity opens the door to the next one that you really want. Yeah.
And I think the other aspect is understand the software development lifecycle. If software is the area of tech that you're going to, you need to understand the process. Don't just walk in the door with no understanding of how a team actually achieves their work or achieves their goal.
Yeah.
You don't have to be technical. I've grown in my technical skills. Like, I can do AWS architecting, but I'm not I can't code. But I understand what's happening.
Yeah.
And I'm also not saying that you need to go and get an AWS certification. I'm not out here promoting that, but you at least need to have an understanding of what the developers are doing so that you can help them along the journey.
Yeah. And again, that's so important, isn't it? Whatever project you find yourself landing on, talk to the experts in the different zones of the project, not so that you can become an expert, because you won't, but so that you can actually understand what they're doing and what their point of view is and what their priorities are, so you can serve them.
Yeah. And you can understand their challenges.
Yeah. Great. That's been absolutely fantastic. Now, for people who want to either get in touch with you or learn more about what you do as a Scrum educator, how can people engage with you online and in the real world?
Yeah, you can reach out to me at Andreanna@projectacademy.co. You can also go to scrum.org and find me as a trainer and also reach out to me there. And obviously you mentioned the podcast. And so feel free, reach out anytime and we can get connected and I can help you transition or start learning Scrum.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. That's been a fantastic introduction to an IT career and a Scrum career. So, Andreanna Marshall, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please do give us a thumbs up if you like this video. I'll be creating loads more great project management content, so please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of it. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.